Also, recently I was thinking about, the difference between how as we age. As men, we go to different stages from, with teenagers to later on, whatever. What are your thoughts about those different stages as boys to men? And, and different chapters you go through, and just how that affects you.
I mean, I feel like
lessons learned in those.
I mean, I feel like now, and speaking in totality in the grand scheme of things, a lot of men are underdeveloped, unfortunately. And I feel like a lot of men don't understand. Like, men might think like, all right, and most of the time, a lot of the attention gets put on the emotional capacity or incapacity in manhood. But I think it's deeper than that. I think like that men don't have to develop past a certain point beyond emotional maturity. I'm not trying to say that a man should go, yeah, you should be emotionally aware, emotionally intelligent, and you should arrive at emotional maturity. But as far as in being super in tune with your emotions, if you are able to get to depth in that capacity, but if you can operate and function and be a empathetic and sympathetic person without going to certain parameters or depths of experiencing your emotions, you don't have to be a fucking soul empath or whatever to be able to function through manhood. But a lot of men are underdeveloped by way of knowing how to handle responsibilities. And it's like, because the times in which responsibilities could have been put on a man, unfortunately, a lot of us was raised by single moms in environments that was catered and coddled to by other women that was probably single moms or aunties or grandmoms. And I always say men only learn from pressure and consequences. So that the underdevelopment come in at the point where it's like, if he never had no pressure put on him, he don't know how to deal with pressure. And at the end of the day, that's what makes a man a man. We strive to overcome challenges because we thrive under pressure, and we like to feel like we do, right? It makes us feel good. So with that being the case, when I think about men in their development, and I'm going to go back to the original question, but I'm going to land here real quick. When I think about it, it's like, if a man never really had to have the responsibilities through his adolescent years, how's he gonna learn how to handle responsibilities as an adult? And then he get thrusted into the role of manhood without no training and get expected to carry a load that he never even foresaw himself doing. And the thing is, being raised by single moms and, them not having that inability to really see they boys struggle, what they do, they try to make their life easier. They want to give him a soft life. And then giving a man a soft life, you create a man that don't want to face challenges, a man that don't know how to come up with solutions, a man that don't know how he's calling you when it's time to overcome an obstacle. And I think that that's why we see, in more cases than not, a lot of men getting put in those challenging situations. And that's where mental health do become an issue, because it's like, unfortunately, you wasn't trained or prepared for this. So now you're dealing with a load of stress that you never even foresaw because it never was your reality. And now you in this position and predicament expected to carry the load for something that you never had to carry before. But another thing I say, man, we only got, I tell especially the single moms, man, like especially raising men in general, but I say to single moms that I was like, understanding like why you need to get your boys around good men and good role models, because we only got 16 years to learn how to become a man before we're a man for the rest of our lives. Like, once you're 17, you're thrust into manhood, you're expected to carry that load and you're expected to know what that look like. But if a man never was in a predicament to learn how to become, because boys don't become men by age, they become men by responsibilities. And you can determine the level of a man based on how he handles responsibility. A man could be 37 years old, but don't handle the responsibilities. He's not the same as a 25, 26-year-old who got all his stuff in line. But it's like, if a man was never taught that, he never had a role model, he never had that example set for him, then he's not going to know how to navigate manhood. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, who you are in your teenage years is going to be different than who you are in your 20s. And who you are in your 20s is going to be different than who you are in your 30s. And you got to know what's needed in each of those seasons of your life. Like, somebody going through their teenage years, they need to be preparing for manhood. Through your 20s is when you're going to explore, you're going to make a lot of your mistakes. This is where you got time to fuck up. This is where you got time to have a bullshit baby mom, or, fucking, you want to catch a case, you want to go to college and drop out and get a job. No, because in your 20s is the time, but once you get to your 30s, that's game time for us. Like, you now have to be intentional about everything. You don't have time to go to school for 6 years to say you don't want to use this degree. You don't have time to sit down for 6 years. You don't have time to tether yourself to somebody for 18 years, because now you are going into your prime, right? People like to say your 20s is in your prime, but that's not true. That's only in fucking sports years. Only in sports years and rapper years is your 20s considered your prime. But if a motherfucker was a 30-year-old doctor, they'd say he was young. If a motherfucker was a 30-year-old lawyer, they'd say he's young. But if you're a 30-year-old rapper or athlete, they're going to say you're old. So a lot of our timeline is based on rapper years and motherfucking sports years, when in reality, at 29, you just kind of going into that vortex of even understanding yourself to even start what you want to do with their manhood. So, understand those different developmental stages and how to navigate them, you'll realize, like, all right, I'm at this particular point. Let me start thinking about where I want to be by this particular point, especially if you didn't have that early example.
Definitely interesting. And when I think about myself, as far as like teens versus 20s versus 30s, of course, I often reflect on my 20s versus my 30s. I never thought about my teen years.
Yeah.
And when I think, of course, that's mostly just school and shit like that. And I guess if I think about the stages, also recently to tie it all together, I think I told you in passing that one of the things I used to always think about was like, what is like the current chapter of your life?
Yeah.
And I think it's just like a kind of like a profound thought and question that most people should probably sit with. Is like, yeah, what is this current? What would you summarize what you're going through right now? What would you summarize what you went through and what you will be aiming for? And I think that kind of makes sure it's one of those like devices I feel or strategies, whatever, to try to make sure you're centered and whatever you want to be at and wherever you're going to is whatever. So recently I actually backtracked my life, not to my teenage years, but to right out of college, so like 22. And I wanted to see like what would I summarize each stage or whatever I was going through at the time in a chapter form, whatever. Yeah. And I was like calling it like my alchemy trail. Yeah. Just seeing like, what things led to other things, trying to get like a picture of what the fuck was going on before and how I get to where I was at currently. Because currently I'm at peace with what I got going on, whatever. Yeah. So how many things were intentional and how many things were kind of just like happenstance, whatever. And I feel like, to your point, my late 20s to the 30s for sure was definitely like, I've said before, like it was lock-in time. I had to make a super drastic shift because I was like, 20s, I didn't realize in real time that I was like going through the motions, figuring out shit, whatever, trying it. And then it hit me during that pandemic like a brick wall, like, oh shit, no, nigga, like if something don't happen, we gonna be sitting here looking at 40, like, and that was never in my cards, I felt like, whatever. So a change was needed. Now, I like where I'm at, whatever. But if I think about my teens though, I feel like I was probably like more cocky. I think in my teenage years, I was definitely just like,
because the status symbols was different. But even this is another thing I want to say to the men that's watching, man. Even the boys that's watching, you gotta understand, man. Women get an unlimited amount of grace throughout life. As men, the older you get, the less grace you get. At 16, you can be it's cocky and it's cute, right? No, at 12, it's cute. 16, you could be cocky. 2022, you approaching them stages where they starting to look at you like a young adult. By the time you're 30, you're a grown ass man. And it's like by then, like think about it. Like by then, like you gotta think a lot. Going back to being underdeveloped, if a boy was able to lean on his auntie, his grandmom, his mom for the things that he needed to get done, right? He's 16, 17, 18, they still want to make. He's still in college years. Oh, we still don't want you doing too much. We still looking out for you. Right after that, he get thrusted into manhood. He don't have the tools and the skill sets to be able to create on his own because he was always used to asking. Think about what that man becomes psychologically 4 or 5 years later when he's now 25 and now his 11-year-old little cousin is 16 and now they getting all that love and attention and the pouring into from auntie, grandma, and maybe even mom. Whereas now your resources and how you used to figure things out, you can't lean on no more because again, as you get older, the grace go down. It's not, you're now a grown man, so you're expected to be able to figure it out. But without that proper training or example or what that looks like, which is why you got to understand as you grow, as you develop, as you get older as a man, that the older you get, the less grace you have. The less people look at you and be like, you shouldn't know better. Because it's like, no, you should know better. And that's why you got to be super duper intentional about that during those years. Like, when I was a teen, the things that I was able to do, I was always, all right, cool, it's ahead of its time, whatever the case may be, but time will catch up with you. And what I mean by time catching up with you is like, at one point, when you 16, you got a car, you him. By the time you 20, it's normal. At 20, if you got to 22, you got a degree, you that. 8 years later, you did nothing with it. At 30, it don't even matter. Like, what are we talking about? So it's like, as you age and get older, you got to transition within those transitions to be able to know, like, the more I get older, the more I grow in age, the less grace I'm going to get, the more I have to know how to figure it out within myself. So, those are different phases. They require different versions of you, and you got to know what that looks like.